Hi, security officers. On June 17th, several security officers got together to talk about retirement again. We also met back in April, and this time we were talking about other workers and what other workers have for a pension. So the focus of this presentation will be talking about what other workers get, including the state of Minnesota workers, for example, building trades, other groups of workers, including SEIU workers. And then, of course, at the end, we'll talk about how do we get this retirement, and that's a very important discussion. Now, at our meeting, we had to educate a few new members on some basic items, make sure everybody was at the same place, basically, about talking about a 401k and a pension. And the first thing, the basis of the American retirement system is Social Security. And when a security officer or janitor retires, they're going to live primarily on Social Security. Now, when I calculated Social Security using the Social Security calculator on the Social Security website, putting in $40,000 and things like that, I came up with it'll be around 45% of what I make now. And the reason I did that is, and it's so general, but it gives you an idea that Social Security is going to be half or less than what you make now. Now, if I can't live on 18.50 an hour, living on $8 an hour is going to be pretty difficult. And this is kind of why retirement is so important. And the other thing to mention about Social Security is that you get your full retirement at 67. If you retire early, you get less every year earlier than 67, a percentage less, and it's quite significant. And you get a little extra if you work till you're 72. Now, we need a full retirement. I found from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, at least since our April meeting, I found some new info, that 77% of full-time workers have access to a retirement plan. And then Vanguard's information said 51% of people participate. In any case, security officer and janitor, the employer you have contributes nothing. But by the way, if we compare this to other unions, 91% of other union workers have retirement. And this is why this is so important. It's probably the biggest piece of a benefit package that we haven't negotiated yet and gotten for people. Now, if we were to explain what a pension is, we would find out that it's kind of a contract. That's the best overview way to explain it. Basically, it's an agreement with the company to pay the Taft-Hartley SEIU fund. So the fund years later will pay you an amount each month after you retire, a certain amount. It's basically like a big contract. Now, the SEIU fund invests in the stock market, real estate, and other income funds and gives you more money back than you put in, or I should say more money than our company puts in. If the SEIU fund loses money, they're still responsible to pay you, and there's ways legally they have to make that up from current members. The company pays in 100%. You pay nothing. Every member is enrolled in benefits. Since this is our contract, there are special benefits: disability pay, early retirement, spouse benefits, and death benefits. All things that you're going to see in the 401k don't exist. The best way to explain a 401k is think of it as a fund, an investment fund. And you, as the owner of the fund, can pick different funds to invest in, stocks or bonds or whatever, based on what the company provides and offers as options. There's a defined contribution. The bosses contribute, but it's not a contract. No one knows how much you'll have later. If the stock market crashes before you retire, it's not going to go well. And if the stock market does well, you could do a little better. Companies will match what you save. If you put in $1,000, the company puts in 500. That's the matching they always talk about with 401k. Anytime you hear a 401k, people talk about the matching. And by the way, the problem with matching is if you put in zero, which is interesting because a lot of my friends don't make a terrible amount of money, and putting in $3,000 a year is difficult. You'll get zero. The secret of a 401k that I found out was that there's this thing called profit sharing. They also call it employer contributions. Basically, 401ks started many years ago as a way to shield CEO pay from taxes, as I understand it, and it's a way to have a tax-deferred account. Rich people don't do matching; they do profit sharing, and we need to get some profit sharing. That's where the company puts money in without a match. Now, security officers, for my first comparison, let's look at the building trades. When I was a security officer, I worked with a lot of the guys in the building trades, the 49ers who operate equipment, the laborers who put up walls. My favorite was the sheetrock guys and the drywallers, the electricians. My son's going to be an electrician if all goes well. And they have a deal where they get paid into their pension every year. and they get a lot of breaks in employment, so their contract was a little different. But as a whole, if you did a 20 and out, 20 years of work before you were 65, you would get 35.50 per month per year of work, which works out to be $720 per month. Not a bad pension. And then the rule of 85 is where I think the building trades are very interesting. You could be 55 years old and have worked 30 years, hit the rule of 85, and you would be cashed out at 1,065 per month and retired at my age. Pretty cool. Now, when I was looking for information on different unions and pensions, I obviously had to invest in my SEIU friends. And I found one of the interesting pensions was the Alina pension plan for Minneapolis. It was basically the first pension plan for private hospital workers. At the time, most hospital workers worked for public institutions or for nonprofits. And right here in Minneapolis, they passed a pension plan starting in 1965 for the technicians, the hospital workers who are not nurses, they are not doctors, but they actually are technicians. And there's 50,000 workers in this pension plan. Allied contributes 67 cents per hour worked. The benefit nets out to be $31 per month per year of service, very similar to the building trades, but a different number. And after 20 years, they'd have 620 per month at 65, and 30 years, 930. I did find that it appears that some of these workers seem to have a 401k. I couldn't put it all together, but there's no reason you couldn't have a 401k and a pension. But notice how much these guys have a great pension and how many thousands of people in the Minnesota area that we're talking about. It's kind of neat. Now, another one of my SEIU friends is Unit 284, the cooks and workers in food service who work for the Minneapolis Public Schools. Remember, they were a part of that big strike with the teachers about a year and a half ago, and they got some significant raises. Well, they're part of PARA. PARA is the acronym for the Minnesota Public Employees Retirement Association. They contribute 6.5% of their total earnings. Notice that's a weird pension thing. They contribute to their own pension plan. We don't normally do that. However, when the employer contributes another 7.5%, notice how much money these people get. This is a better pension in terms of the net gain you make when you retire. So based on your average high 5 years of service, a $40,000 a year worker with the high 5 around 40,000, 65 years old and 20 years of service, $966 a month. That's more than the building trades. And then over here with the second one, 30 years of service, retiring at 65, is $1,533 a month. That's basically 46% of what you would take home if you were a $40,000 a year worker. Add your Social Security into that, and you know what you see? You're making almost what you made full pay when you worked. This means a great retirement. These folks are working for their retirement. They're going to basically be vacationing a lot more than most of us. And I just thought it was really cool to talk about how food service workers have a great pension in our union. Now, this led me to follow up on what PARA is. PARA is a retirement plan for Minnesota's public employees. It started in 1931 in the middle of the Depression. 440,000 current and former public employees in Minnesota from 2,100 government agencies are in PARA. PARA, by the way, is huge. It has monthly benefits for more than 120,000 retirees, disabled members, and survivors of deceased members. Remember that survivor benefit of a pension plan. Just to give you an overview of who we're talking about, it's social workers, like this young lady here, firefighters, snowplow drivers, like this gentleman here, and state patrol workers, office workers. I'm pointing in my camera at the different pictures of the different people groups I have on the right side there. And about 8% of Minnesotans are in PARA. So in other words, 8% of Minnesotans are in PARA. When people tell you that people don't have pensions anymore, well, they're not counting the public workers because a huge number of our population in Minnesota has been a state worker or government authority at some time. Now, PARA paid over $2 million in benefits to retirees and former members in 2020. 89% went to Minnesota addresses. Now, my face is kind of covering up this little blurb I have here. But basically, an amazing thing happened in 2003 that would only happen to state workers. The state of Minnesota decided to cut down the amount you have to give to 5.5% to the plan, reduced vesting from 5 years to 3. Just imagine a company sweetening a pension plan. Well, our state government sweetened the pension plan for millions of or thousands of people in Para, and they just last year. Pretty cool. Now, if security officers and janitors were to get a pension, SEIU funds, the National Industry Pension Fund, would be the provider. This would currently includes in the pension fund nationally airport workers, hospitality workers, healthcare workers, janitors, racetrack, security workers in California, and ready for this, cemetery workers who are unionized somewhere in the world. Average minimum payment into these pension funds for these 64 different groups is 58 cents per hour, and the average max is $1.90 per hour. And there appear to be a lot of classifications in some of these contracts. Maybe some people get more by seniority. I'm not really sure why we have an average minimum and average max. But what I thought was fascinating was the average for all is 94 cents. In other words, expecting a company to give you $1 an hour, we'll say, towards your pension seems to be about the average for the SEIU pension fund. Now, this pension fund is rather large, $1.4 billion in assets, pretty secure. 107,116 participants in 2022. Of that group, some of them are inactive, as in former employees waiting to retire, active employees who are still putting money in, and finally, retirees. So three different groups in that 107,000 person number. Now, SEIU itself has 2 million members, so 107,000 people have a pension. That kind of gives you an idea how many people in this fund, in SEIU, have a pension. Now, as I was Googling around looking for information about pensions, I found out the state of Minnesota passed an amazing law in 2023. And it says in January of 2025, actually 2024, they set it up, 2025, it'll roll out. There's going to be an amazing, weird setup called the Minnesota Secure Choice Retirement Program Act. It's going to require every employer to have payroll deduction into an IRA, either a Roth or a regular IRA. That means whether it's pre-tax or post-tax, but that's not really the issue we're worried about today. It'll be an automatic deduction when it starts, unless a member opts out by filling out a form. That means your employer will take out, say, 3% or 5%, put it in a savings fund for you, and you will take home less money. Kind of good to be saving money, but in the short term, it still means less money. On $40,000 a year, that means you'll give up $1,200 in income. In the short term, it feels like a tax. So currently, very few security officers use our 401k in this because we have one in security, and it has no matching. And why do very few officers use it? Well, the first things first is our wages are too low. It's really hard to save money when you're surviving on every dollar. Then, of course, the employers don't contribute or match, which they don't in the Minnesota Secure Choice Plan either. They can't. It's an IRA. They're not allowed to. So there will not be an employer match ever or any employer contribution through the Minnesota Secure Choice Plan as it's written. Our 401k is an opt-in. Maybe from this experience, we should learn that it should be a opt-out. Anyway, Secure Choice feels good, but it's not really that good. It's going to drive savings. It's going to probably benefit many people, but in terms of your net income, it's not free. It's your money. We want to use employer money. So this is why this is not really that good for us. Now let's go back to 401ks. This is the most common type of retirement plan in Minnesota. Most people have some form of employer contribution to a fund, as we talked about. And I didn't get into like breaking down everybody's 401ks. There's so many, but when I worked at like at American Express and Ameriprise, I had a 401k that was quite generous. And when we work in these office buildings, they're full of people who have 401ks and different retirement packages. So as we look at 401ks, even though we'd probably maybe prefer a pension, a 401k may actually be what we get. And here's some background on 401ks. Back to Vanguard in March of 2023, Vanguard had a newsletter that was pretty interesting. It basically explained that 95% of employers contribute either by matching or by employer contributions, sometimes called profit sharing. We're in the wonderful 5%, Mr. Security Officer, who get no contribution. And uh, and then of course 85% of the plans include matching. That is the most common form of employer contribution. You put in 3%, the company puts in 3%. And then non-matching contributions 46%. I'm most interested in the non-matching contributions because I've noticed that's what the rich guys get. And also because as a security officer, if I had to put in say $3,000 a year on my 40,000 a year, that's money I can't use today to eat, and I'm not eating that well now. Most of our officers want more money, not less. So I think we really want the employers to pay for our retirement, which is possible. So back to this other thing, employer contributions. Just to give you some framework, if we end up looking at a 401k, the average employer match is around 4.4% of pay. The average non-matching contribution is 5.1%. Employer contributions averaged in the 4 to 5% range when you put the two together. Part of where I'm going with this is to explain to people that that's an average. If you make more money, you are a director, a vice president, a CEO, your matching, your employer contribution will be far more generous. So it's important to realize that you and I are in the working class, and our employer contributions would normally be 2 or 3%, we'll say. And so we need to be aware that employer contributions are higher than that, and we need to be asking for significantly above average. If the average is 4 to 5%, we need to be asking for significantly more, 8%, 10%. A good retirement is often 14%. So we want to be above average and asking for the right thing. So, how do we get this retirement? Whether we get a great pension like we're really shooting for, whether we end up with a better 401k, or if you're a janitor and you get a 401k that has some matching in it, how do we get it? Well, we bargain for it in the next contract. That simple. And here's some of the process of the bargaining. And this picture is from 2020. You can kind of see me in the middle, different haircut, but that's me, sitting next to Chris Lewis, my friend, and some other people in there recognized who showed up at our retirement meeting. But this is bargaining from 2019 and 2020. So our process this year is October 7th. We elect the bargaining committee. The committee drafts the new contract. They take the old one and modify it, add everything into it, and give it to the bosses, and that becomes our proposal for the bargaining. We'll be at the Mall of America. This is going to be an amazing time. There's going to be 7 other unions. Upwards of 30,000 members are going to be part of these unions. Then when we get to the actual bargaining, and you're on the bargaining committee, we'll say, we're going to be meeting at a hotel. Usually it's the Delta Hotel over here in Northeast. We have an agenda ahead of time, so we know today we're going to talk about pension this day, we're going to talk about HR issues this day, and sick time this day. We literally there's like an agenda. I think we had 6 or 8 meetings in 2019, 2020. But anyway, about these things with the bosses, there'll be proposals and counter proposals, and an agreement is a tentative agreement, a TA. Now, the big important thing to mention about bargaining is that every officer's invited. We need a bargaining team. We'll get those people out on work release, and we'll pay you to go and get you out of your work. But every officer's invited. The janitors have upwards of 150 janitors showing up at their meetings. It's really fun. And when the proposals are put out, the bosses step out and we talk with everybody in the room. It's really fun. And so if you're there, you'll be included in the discussion. So I encourage you to go to bargaining if you're not on the bargaining team. But we do need a committed team of people prepared to fight for a pension and know the differences between a pension and a 401k and be able to make that decision based on what the bosses offer us and what we can accept. We need you on the bargaining team. So the team that met on June 17th, we talked about we're just one big small group, and we started asking these questions. What can I do as an officer? What can I do about this? How can I empower myself? Do I care enough? And I think when we asked everybody, what did you want? And all the members there raised their hands and said they prefer a pension. They feel it's a better deal. And I'm not surprised by this. Pensions have always been supported by unions and their members because they're guaranteed money. There's no contribution from us. There's all these other options. Pensions seem a little bit more secure and predictable. So, who gets to decide what plans we get? Well, that answer is members, members who are on the bargaining team. Now, I was a security officer for many years, an account manager. I can relate to a lot of security officer things, but I'm not a security officer anymore, and you don't want anybody from SEIU telling you what to do. You want members to pick that. That's why we want members to be on the bargaining team. Now, Why should I attend the bargaining team meetings? Well, I think I kind of already filled that out for you. You don't want Dan making decisions for you. That's it. Um, but anyway, we definitely want members to be making all the decisions about what kind of retirement we get. A final question is, do my coworkers know about this? And my hope is as bargaining team members, as interested in retirement, we're talking to our coworkers and stirring them up. Agitating them is what we often call it in the world of organizers, to realize that we don't have a proper retirement. And what are we, not good enough or what? I mean, come on, we deserve retirement too. So we didn't get any other questions, but I did get a lot of support. Every person who attended this Saturday's meeting wanted to be on the bargaining team. It's amazing. And when people get informed and realize they're needed, people step up, and we need you on the bargaining team and to show up to bargaining. The bosses don't care about Dan. They don't care what I think. They don't give a crap about me. They're used to me. I call myself the dog barking in the woods. But when a lot of members show up, they get intimidated. Then they realize they got to do something. So please consider joining us, being on the bargaining team by October 7th. Let your organizer know. We'd like to have a bargaining team of 150 people. Believe it or not, we'd really like to have a huge bargaining team. So let me know if you're interested. Thanks. Take care.